So, good morning and welcome to the office of the Friedrichshain Foundation for Freedom. My name is Jules Maarten. I'm the regional director here of this office and our West European region. And we're delighted to have you here for this hugely important topic. And I believe it has become a topic that, of course, for yourselves, has been a big issue for a very long time. I think what we have seen, especially, and this is probably one of the lessons learned from the Ukraine war, is that there is an increasing understanding in society, even amongst men, that this is an issue that we need to deal with more. Of course, the sort of thing about women in conflict and in war that grabs the headlines is when women are victims, and that is hugely important. But the understanding that there is more than just that as an element, I think is new to many people. At least the understanding that this is the case, and therefore very important that we occupy ourselves with that, because it is not just about victims, it is about equality, it is about empowering women in so many ways in society, and in this case we're talking about war, which is of course even more extreme than other things that happen in society. So I'm very pleased that you are here. I'm very pleased that we can be part of this process and of this debate. And without any further ado, I will pass the microphone to Gemma and Maria, who will guide you through this event. So again, very welcome, and I hope that you will have a very good meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for a very warm welcome. My name is Maria Marta-Suit. I'm a policy analyst with European Policy Centre, and today, together with Gemma, we will lead and drive the discussion. I would like to highlight that the objective is to have this event and debate as a conversation. There are no opening speeches or introductory remarks, as our length is anyone is welcome to raise their hand and ask a question or intervene at any point in time. I would like very much to thank the speakers in person and online, as well as all the participants who've gathered here today. Thank you very much for taking your time and making an effort. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is the greatest human security crisis since the death of Stalin in 1953 and the 1990s Balkan Wars. Now, wars affect the population in different ways. They affect both men and women and children, but women in particular are facing high risks and challenges. Ukraine is no exception. On one hand, women in Ukraine are warriors and heroes. On the other hand, they're victims. Thousands of Ukrainian women have joined the armed forces, including the front lines, leaving home and families and jobs behind. Many Ukrainian women are leading civic organizations that provide recovery and war relief efforts. At the same time, the UN has highlighted that in 2024, about 40 million people are predicted to need humanitarian assistance. 56% of them are women and girls. And gender stereotyped impacts include lack of employment, dependence on social assistance, lack of access to finance, lack of access to participating in policy planning and implementation. Women are also, alongside girls, are more prone to experience conflict-inflicted violence and human trafficking. And the objective here today is to really determine what are the needs of women and girls, how we can empower them, what can we learn from Ukraine, and how can we convey those lessons in other war contexts, with a view to making sure that our policy is more robust and stronger on this important topic. So I very much look forward to our discussion, and I'll just give the floor to Gemma now to introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Good morning also from my side. I'm Gemma Pölzgen, a journalist from Berlin, and I'm part of a group of women here, Women in International Security Germany, which is WISE. You see them here. And we thank the Naumann Stiftung a lot for hosting us today here. Before coming to the actual discussion, I would like to introduce our speakers today. So there is on the left side Anna Wilmensdottir, she has been working as an advisor to NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security and for Human Security since 2022. She is an experienced diplomat from the Foreign Ministry of Iceland and holds a degree in law. Also, a warm welcome to Joanna Naumanen. She is a senior expert on gender equality and women, peace and security from Finland, with almost 2 decades of experiences. And since 2022, she has served as a senior advisor to the EU Ambassador for Gender and Diversity, focusing on the implementation of the EU Gender Action Plan 3. And she holds a degree in social science. And a very warm welcome to our ladies from Ukraine. You see them here on the screen. There's Olena Rozdaskoya. She is a co-founder and head of the board of the NGO Voices of Children, which was founded in 2019 and helps Ukrainian children to deal with the trauma of war. Together with her co-founder, the film director Azad Safarov, she participated in the documentary film A House Made by Splinters, which was nominated in 2023 for the Oscar. Also, warm welcome to Olga Tokayuk. She's a Chatham House Open Society University Network Academic Fellow in the Ukraine Forum, where she's working on Ukraine-related projects. And her background is in journalism, with a focus on international affairs and counter disinformation research. And she is a former head of foreign news desk at the independent Ukrainian Hromadske TV, which is perhaps well known to a lot of people here. So I would like to hand back to Maria, who will start with the questions.
Thank you. So just to kickstart the discussion with a rather broad question, perhaps I can appeal here to both Anna and Jonna. In your view and from your very wide-ranging experiences, what is the role of women during and after war? Jonna, perhaps you can.
Specifically in Ukraine context or in general?
In general, and if you could specify and tailor it to Ukraine, that's great as well.
That's a very broad question. Role of women, I would actually start with how war impacts the role of women. Because if we look at any conflict, whether it is Ukraine or any other conflict ongoing across the world that has passed or is currently ongoing, women gain stronger positions within war societies, very largely related to the fact that in our societies, men are still largely the majority engaging in warfare. Of course, recognizing also, so do women participate in their armed forces in many contexts, but nevertheless, it's mostly men who get called into front. Subsequently, the society ends up being held together by women. Women gain stronger positions economically. They end up taking even stronger roles, both in terms of their households, but then also in terms of public engagements. Now the struggle is, how do we keep this up also in a post-war economy? How do we keep it up also in terms of, for example, in Ukrainian context of recovery planning? Because when we look at war economies, the war economy ends up meaning that all the financial support or finances available for a state are quite depleted. So once we move forward from the war to post-war context, social services will not have financing. It is the women who will be often called to take care of the children, to make sure that daycare centers are run, but without pay, ultimately, a lot of the time. They lose their positions too easily in decision making, and that is the current challenge, is how do we maintain the active role, the leadership that women also in Ukraine have been demonstrated, and how do we maintain and keep that up also in the recovery phase?
Yeah, okay. Turn this on first. Hello. Hello everyone. I do agree a lot with Jonna on what she's been saying about what we see in general, but what we are also seeing in Ukraine, as you correctly basically said in your opening words, is that we're seeing women in a very precarious economic situation, more precarious perhaps than for men. So they have around, 15.1% less access to having jobs. They are getting less wages basically for an equal value work. And there is, as Jonna correctly said, also there is a lot of extra work for unpaid labor. Many hours a week actually, and this is something that we also need to be looking at. And then I think it was a very good point which was said in the beginning that, I mean, yes, many people view women as victims during these issues, but women are also, they are powerful advocates as well. They have strong roles as well. They are joining the armed forces, and in Ukraine they're doing invaluable volunteer work as well, and they are strong advocates inside and outside. So I think this strong agency role that women can also have during conflict is also something that we need to value. But it's true, there are barriers to their participation, and it's perhaps more difficult to actually address these barriers during conflict, which is why it's so important to actually advance on integrating gender perspectives also during peacetime.
Olga and Olena, you heard just now what the two other speakers said, and my question to you would be, what does the Ukrainian state actually do for women under the conditions of war? It's very difficult, but perhaps you can name also some examples of what has been done.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this event and for having us. I think it's a very important topic, and I agree that women sometimes face the biggest challenges when their country is at war. And as other speakers already mentioned, it just adds to the burden of that women already have. But also, as other speakers mentioned, women can demonstrate their agency and be, very important in the resistance, in survival of their country, in providing care for vulnerable society members such as children and elderly people. In terms of what the state is doing for women in Ukraine, well, the state is already facing a huge burden. The institutions, the main focus of all Ukrainian institutions at the moment is to ensure the stability of the state, that it doesn't collapse, that it continues to remain as resilient as possible, facing incredible challenges and pressure and attacks every day. So, I think the question is really not what the state is doing for women, is about the collaboration between women as members of the society and the state to ensure the survival and resistance and resilience of the Ukrainian state. And I think women are contributing in many ways to this. So first of all, of course, as members of the armed forces, currently there are more than 45,000 women in the Ukrainian armed forces. This is an increase from last year when there were 2,000 plus, and an increase from the before full-scale invasion figures when there were, in 2014, for example, 10 years ago, there were just 16,000 women, and now there are 45. So that is an illustration of how much more involved women are in the defense of Ukraine, how much more present they are in the armed forces of Ukraine. They still face challenges there. Only last year they got the uniform, which was specifically tailored for women. Initially, the state wasn't able to provide that uniform, but after some active campaigning by Ukrainian service women, that happened. They sometimes still face the glass ceiling in the armed forces because there are virtually no women in higher ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces. There are no female generals yet. So it is still a struggle and a challenge, but the number of women and the prominence and their voice in the armed forces is definitely growing. And maybe something else that I would like to mention here, not to make this remark too long, is the presence of women in the Ukrainian among Ukrainian public servants and civil servants. The figures are not very high. It's just 25% for the government, for the cabinet of ministers, 25% are women, and in the parliament it is even less, it is less than 20%. So there is still a lot of work to do, but there are also really prominent and vocal women in the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian parliament. So there are female vice ministers, deputy prime ministers who are doing important work, for example, in the EU integration, like Deputy Prime Minister Ola Stefanishina. There are important women in other positions in the government, such as Alexandra Azarkhina in the Ministry of Development of Communities, Territories and Infrastructure, that is dealing with the reconstruction plans of Ukraine. I think it's a cooperation. It's not something that the state, as I said, is facing incredible challenges. It is understandable that at the moment the main focus is on surviving, and I think in this cooperation between the state and women who are present in the state institutions and in the armed forces, it is possible to achieve that goal.
Olena, will you proceed, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ola, for that brilliant input about our state, because honestly, me from my side, I don't know even what to say about the role of state or something that state are doing for women. I would say that now in this situation, yes, we all women all together are doing something for to save our state also. So I'm a child rights advocate and leading one of the, I think, biggest charity foundations in Ukraine that focusing their work and helping children and families to to survive the war. Voices of Children, and me personally, I'm also working in the war conditions and in the front line since 2015. And I remember very good that time in 2015 when the war started in Ukraine in 14. It was like really interesting situation to see a woman in the front line and a woman that are trying to do something, not recognizing herself only as a victim of circumstances and only as that person they're asking for help, but that person that organizing things and involving money and rebuilding houses. And I don't know, and seeing herself in the position of a leader. And I remember also in that time, 10 years ago, in small villages, those people who were organizing humanitarian aid or some different kind of activities for children, or headmasters of schools, all of them was women. And it was so interesting to see that they are doing everything but don't recognize themselves as leaders of these communities, as persons who have to be taken as relevant to those men who are somewhere higher deciding different questions. And I always tried to give that back to that women, that they are good enough to really decide how to develop their village or their school. Now, 10 years after 10 years, it's not that same situation, and I would see that a lot of women really recognizing themselves as those who can lead reforms or charities or NGOs, and I would say now even to speak about children and needs of families. Most of my colleagues, it's women in civil society, and I would say that it's also our transformation, and it's not. And when we are advocating children's or any other reforms or any other child's rights, it's not only taken that, okay, you are mothers, you must understand children better, and that's why you are working in the children's sphere and advocating because of children. It's not because we are professionals and we not have to be mothers to advocate and to work in the child rights protection sphere. So I'm really glad that we have this also transformation, that it's not obligatory to be a mother to protect children's rights. And also I wanted to mention in my organization, Voices of Children, we have almost more than 150 people on the ground working in our centers all around Ukraine, and most of them are next to the front line in the east, north and south, and 90% of our employees on the ground, it's women, 90%. And I would say those 10%, it's drivers, sometimes coordinators, project managers, and for example, we have 90 psychologists in our centers, and only 2 of them are men. So now, what the role of women on the ground, they are basically directly those people who are staying next to the children and providing professional services and help to those children and families who suffer in the war and who witnessing who have who need psychological support or any other kind of support. So it's women are now quite visible in the situation of humanitarian support or psychosocial support or any kind of services on the ground in the frontline cities. But still we need to, still I have that feeling that I need to like remember all the time to the women I work with that you are good enough mother, you are good enough professional, you are really have right to speak and to decide and to take a leadership in the questions you want to change. So, but anyway, I'm happy also being Ukrainian and staying in Ukraine and working in the front line for last 10 years. That anyway, you don't have to prove to nobody that you are still good enough mother if you are. Even if you are working in a frontline village with a hard topic and don't have to prove to your colleagues and your relatives that you are not that you are a professional and you are doing your work not because you feel pity about children, but you just know how to work and you are expert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Olga and Elena. I think what you highlighted is immensely important because on one hand, you're saying that, while the state institutions are preoccupied by maintaining political stability and survival, you are doing, as women, all you can to unite and basically keep abreast and keep the whole societal fabric together. And you're not seeking any, leadership roles or recognition for that. But you are de facto leaders. And here what I would highlight is this, yes, of course there are those stereotypes about women or particularly linkage of women to children, but here nevertheless I would highlight that, you should be enabled further, you should be paid accordingly, this work should be recognized, perhaps post-war, in the post-war scenarios, and all you do should be valued and integrated by the state structures and institutions, and I hope this is what is going to happen. But I would like to turn now to NATO and EU. Sorry, yes, you wanted to say, please go ahead, yes, absolutely.
I just want to,
thank you.
Because what we hear from our Ukrainian colleagues make me remember something. Bit more than 2 years ago, very soon after the Russian war of aggression started, it was the women from Ukraine that came to international platforms to tell what was happening. Very much because, first of all, of course, the men couldn't leave the country. They were forbidden. But it was the women. I still recall a meeting in the OSCE in Vienna, the International Security Cooperation, and these incredibly brave women, civil society leaders from Ukraine, telling about all the violations happening across the region. And there, you would have the Russian Perm Rep hearing in front of all the other 57 OSCE states. And I thought that was just a powerful example of this kind of leadership that the Ukrainian women have been demonstrating.
Thank you very much for that comment. I would like now to more specifically ask NATO representative and EU. Of course, when it comes to women, peace and security agenda and UN resolutions since 2000, it's primarily the state responsibility to implement them, to make sure that those measures are for protection, empowerment, are embedded and streamlined from gender point of view across the different national policies and doctrines. But I know that NATO and EU are supporting Ukraine and civil society and women in particular through various programs and measures. Could you share with us what is being done from inside of the EU and NATO, and what are these needs of women, how you're working towards empowering and supporting them, and what solutions are there? Thank you very much. Perhaps Anna, I could ask you.
Thank you. So Ukraine remains a priority for NATO, and NATO's when it comes to women, peace and security related issues, we are working very in close cooperation with our Ukrainian partners. So the NATO Secretary General Special Representative, Ms. Irene Felin, actually recently came back from a visit to Ukraine, where she was participating in a conference on conflict-related sexual violence, and where she also had a number of very useful bilateral meetings with a large number of stakeholders. In practical terms, our main cooperation tool is the so-called Comprehensive Assistance Package. Maybe call it CAP next time, because it's a little bit of a tongue twister. But so this is basically the tool through which allies fund projects. And last year, Special Representative Feline, she actually commissioned an assessment report on the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine through a gender lens. This assessment identified a number of concrete findings and recommendations related to gender, which were designed to inform NATO's tailored support to Ukraine through the CAP, or the Comprehensive Assistance Package. And so consequently, 2 proposals to submit projects under the CAP have been drafted. One of them is actually related to funding for the production of women's military uniforms and body armor, which there's a need for, as we heard earlier. And the second relates to gender-responsive leadership training in the armed forces. So that's what we're working on right now when it comes to women, peace and security related issues. And actually, just to quickly go back to what was said earlier, because I think it was a very good point that Jonna said, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that Ukraine actually did a lot of work to address gender and women, peace and security related challenges since 2014. And they have really made some notable progress when it comes relating to integrating gender perspectives into the national institutions, including the defense institution and the armed forces. But there are, of course, gaps that still remain.
And Jonna, we just heard what is done on the NATO side, so now we're interested in hearing what is done by the European Union.
European Union, let's start with recognizing, is a big machinery which I am yet to totally figure out, despite having been there for 2 years. So I don't have all the information, but it's done by the European Union. But of course, EU is probably one of, together with the member states, one of the largest supporters of Ukraine in every aspect. The financial support alone, if I'm not entirely forgetting the numbers, about 88 billion euros. And in addition, currently another 50 billion has been pledged through a separate Ukraine facility. So the financial support that EU provides to Ukraine, very notable. In terms of gender equality, now let me get to that. EU has a policy framework which is called Gender Action Plan 3. And one of the requirements that the Gender Action Plan 3 establishes is that 85% of the new actions, external actions of the EU, should be made with a gender marker. I think it's 2 or 1. Well, basically what it says in written is to have a gender equality as a notable component of the project. So now the ball is then to the court of both our EU counterparts as well as the Ukrainian counterparts to ensure that this EU assistance incorporates the gender perspectives through gender analysis. The policy framework is there. Whether that and the degree to that is to what it is taking place in practice, there's a long way to go probably to make it fully happening. But we are engaging as an EU in terms of that as well with our partners within EU through different structures, gender responsive leadership being one of them. Then in terms of very specific actions, the EU has a monitoring mission in Ukraine. Within the monitoring mission, we have gender advisors, human rights advisors, victims rights specialists, who all work quite closely together with the overall mission structure, supporting, among many other things, political reforms, security sector reforms. EU supports the implementation of the Ukrainian National Action Plan on 1325, as well as financially supporting the UN Ukrainian and UN framework for cooperation on addressing conflict-related sexual violence. I think the EU support to that has been about 4 million in supporting specifically that element of the implementation in setting up victim-centered practices in Ukraine and engaging among many other players with Pamela Patton and her office in supporting trauma-informed response in Ukraine. In addition, of course, gender equality is part of the fundamentals. So now that Ukraine is in EU accession process, this brings us further tools of trying to, of basically engaging with Ukraine on policy reforms, national legislative reforms.
And like noted by Anna, quite a lot has been done. Ratification of Istanbul Convention being one of the very main progress elements by the Ukrainian government under war conditions. But there are many other elements of gender equality that we as an EU also expect to have in terms of policy frameworks, but also, of course, their implementation. I'm sure there are many other elements I'm forgetting now, but this is kind of the overview.
And just wanted to ask, it's the UN resolution starting with 2000 where women, peace and security agenda is derived. How is that coming into play when it comes to implementation of NATO's and EU's gender mainstream perspective with Ukraine, but also with partners other than Ukraine? For example, Moldova or Georgia. What can we learn also from other contexts? For example, Bosnia. Because looking back, I think that was one of the key triggers, the human security and human rights violations, and particularly with impact on women, where this sparked a broad and wider debate on women, peace and security. Could you just take us through it from the NATO and EU point of view? Thank you.
I can start maybe with a broader reflection. For us, women, peace and security, first of all, it's a massive political priority and a political commitment that we integrate in our broader gender equality framework. So for us, women, peace and security is a tool that is intersecting with gender equality overall. So that's why it's integrated in so-called Gender Action Plan 3 of the EU to start. Then when we go to the history of the women, peace and security and us working in external action, full recognition that women, peace and security was born by the states emerging from the conflict. Bosnia one of these, but also certainly quite a number of southern countries. We had Namibia, we had quite a few Asia-Pacific countries involved in bringing through this resolution. So it was a geographically very diverse coalition of states and civil society that pushed forward 1325. EU has something called Council Conclusions. I don't know how well aware you are of the different EU tools, but Council Conclusions is a tool that is political commitment and political agreement by 27 EU states. And that means every single word, every single framing of a topic is agreed to a comma even. Very soon after Russian war of aggression started, EU recognized that we are living in a new geopolitical reality. And we had to renew our commitment to women, peace and security. And that's where our 2022 Council Conclusions were born. And these Council Conclusions specifically recognize also Ukraine as a context in terms of EU's engagements. Recognizing the need to address conflict-related sexual violence, but also it recognizes things that I mentioned earlier, such as recovery. So the so-called fourth pillar of the women, peace and security agenda. And the last, perhaps what I'd like to elevate is our approach, strategic approach to women, peace and security that EU has. Normally women, peace and security has these strategic pillars of 3 Ps. So participation, protection, prevention. We've taken those, but we've taken the protection and the prevention pillar together with then the relief, the post-conflict part of it. And we mainstreamed in our strategic approach to participation, because we don't think you can address protection or prevention or recovery without fully mainstreamed participation. And similarly, gender mainstreaming cuts across our approach to women, peace and security. And when it comes to women, peace and security now, this is something that binds 27 EU member states, and we have quite a strong structures supporting women, peace and security resolution. So for us it's certainly a key also in terms of our engagements with Ukraine.
Thank you. Perhaps Anna, you could also draw on that, in particular highlight also what is different in Ukraine case compared to, if anything, compared to women, peace and security agenda that is also applied in different countries like Bosnia or like we heard Namibia, and how NATO is mainstreaming that. Thank you.
I actually want to start by telling you that, for us, gender equality is smart defense. Let's put it like that. To put it, it's gender equality and the women, peace and security are necessary components to sustainable peace. And in NATO's 2022 strategic concept, allies underscored that gender equality is a reflection of NATO's values for the first time. And in the 2023 Vilnius Summit communique, allies underlined the critical importance of women's full, equal and meaningful participation in all aspects of peace and stability. And so at NATO, we have also now, also because of the changed security environment, been working on a new women, peace and security policy. So this new women, peace and security policy will actually be a deliverable for the Washington Summit next July. And it basically also better reflects the 2022 strategic concept, the changed security environment, as I said earlier, because our older policy dates from 2018. And it's also to better emphasize basically how the integration of women, peace and security across the three core tasks of NATO, which are deterrence and defense, crisis mitigation and management, and cooperative security. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Olga, what do you think? I mean, this kind of concepts, do they actually help you in your situation in the war in Ukraine?
Can you please elaborate? What exactly do you mean?
Yeah, you heard that there are concepts of the European Union and NATO for women in these situations, and I would like to know if in the concrete situation you are in, if this helps something or they are missing out perhaps some points which you find more important.
Well, you know, when we are talking about the situation of women and gender equality in Ukraine, we have to understand that the first and foremost challenge and issue for all Ukrainians now, regardless of their gender, is survival and is winning the war and winning the peace. And, you know, everybody in Ukraine is involved in that, is trying to contribute in some way. The government is working together with civil society for that. And unfortunately, as we see it, the situation on the battlefield is changing not in Ukraine's favor. There are delays in the provision of weapons to Ukraine from its allies. Ukraine appreciates the support that it has been receiving over this year since the Russian full-scale invasion started, but if that support is not sustained, we could soon face a very different situation on the battlefield. And that will have a direct impact also on the rights of women and on their situation. We know what is happening on the occupied territories of Ukraine, what is happening there to women. We know about widespread cases of sexual violence, conflict-related sexual violence against not only women but also children, men, even elderly people in Ukraine during the first months of 2022 in Kyiv region when it was under Russian occupation. And in other parts of Ukraine that have been subsequently liberated, and only because they were liberated we know about these cases. We have numbers, we have people who filed complaints, who went to the prosecutor's office, and the number actually of those cases that are being investigated at this moment is very low. It's only 274 cases as of March of this year, as declared by Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska. And of course, this is because there is a lot of stigma attached to the specific crime of sexual violence, but also because there are so many other cases that have happened or are happening on the occupied territories of Ukraine, which we do not know about, where women do not have any possibility to ask for help, to feel protected, because they are facing oppression, torture, violence on behalf of the Russian occupation forces. So, it is good that there are these plans. We should be making plans for, what happens after Ukrainian victory, after the peace is achieved. But I think the most pressing thing at the moment is to ensure that, this peace comes and that Ukrainian victory comes. Because without that, all our plans will just not be relevant. And I've been to Ukraine just recently. I'm currently in London, but I just returned a few days ago from Ukraine. Elena is there in Ukraine. She can tell you more about their reality. But it is very sobering when you are in Ukraine and you are, feeling firsthand the almost daily Russian missile attacks that recently destroyed many important objects of Ukrainian energy infrastructure. We have no idea how the summer and the winter this year will look like in Ukraine, because for now the shortages are not felt that much, but Russians are continuing their bombardment. They're more successful because there are less missiles, there are less there is less air defense capacity in Ukraine to protect its sky, to protect its civilians, to protect its infrastructure objects from these attacks. So the situation is very dynamic, and it is very sobering to just be there, to see these pressing survival issues that Ukrainian women and other people are experiencing every day. So I think we definitely should focus on that. We should plan for the future, we should plan for the recovery, but unless Ukraine receives more substantial military aid, and unless it is able to stop Russians, we will unfortunately be talking very soon about, more and more human rights violations, sexual violence, and so on.
Alena, do you agree, or you have other points? Did we lose her, actually? Alena? Okay, then perhaps we go on. You take.
So what I'm hearing, just upon reflection, very rightly put by Olena, you're back, I see. So yeah, I'll just finish. Basically, I just wanted to highlight the plea by Olga that there is a must for continued support for Ukraine, military support, defense support, but at the same time accountability is what I'm hearing. There are a lot of crimes and injustices done that are brought to the open light, but there's a lot that is happening in the background which is not necessarily known, and it's very important that all these crimes are reported and brought eventually to justice. Olena, we've lost you there for a few seconds, but now you're back. Would you like to add anything? I hope you heard what Olga said, and perhaps when adding, you could also highlight what you think EU and NATO could do more. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's really sometimes it's even easier to be inside of the war, because you really don't have the time to think so much how you will win and what will be in the future, and just to do to live your everyday routine. Because if again one in the evening you would ask yourself, okay, what's next? And already we have 10 years, and we have those kids who never witnessing a peace, and they were growing up in war conditions for all their childhood years, and we have occupied areas for already 10 years. It's Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. And if one day you would ask, okay, what shall we do with those children who don't remember Ukraine, but they were born in Ukraine but never witnessing at Ukrainian school? It's really so complicated questions, and we already have 2 years of full-scale invasion, and we very often meet those children who never go to offline school because they went to first class when it was a COVID, after it was restricted and it was online, and they spent for 2 years online school at school, and after the full-scale invasion started, and they continue to study online, and already 4 years they never visited school it is in our imagination how it's to go to school. So we are dealing with that generation of children that we still have to discover so much and for so long time. And if and we do understand that the war is not finished yet, and it will not finish soon. And after war we would have a after conflict time, after war time, and we would need so many specialists, so many experts that know how to deal with the post-traumatics, with PTSD, and with all of these things, and how to even teach those children who don't know how to study in our own imagination how it's supposed to be. So it's a totally different generation and it's also, we are living in that situation that in Kharkiv it's so dangerous. It's everyday shellings, but there is a Wi-Fi, there is an internet connection, and you can easily message to any child who are now living just so close to the Russian border, and it can be attacked by a shahed or any bomb like any second, and you are still in a connect with this child, but you don't know how to help to this family, and you don't have any even the imagination how it's really possible to do. Yeah, what's really you can do for help, that just to say please stay strong and contact online to our group support in this time and sort of things. And maybe in summer you will join to our summer camp program, and it will be with a psychological, psychosocial rehabilitation part. But anyway, after you will come back home to your native city when every second it's a danger and possibility to die. So it's really a lot of pressure on also and women, just as a, I'm not saying that men are not in this pressure, but women, because yes, most of the women, they are staying and keeping households because men are in the front line, and somehow you have to develop yourself as a personality and continue to work professionally and continue to organize your family life and continue to think how to really support your own children. And if you are a worker as a psychologist, for example, in our foundation, you are also helping to another children and this everyday routine. On one hand, really helps, and the other hand, there is still so many things that we have to think how to deal in the future and how to really support Ukraine in the future. But so, on my own opinion, it's we really have to invest in the girls and in young students, because tomorrow they will be those people maybe that will work in this social and the psychosocial support and the humanitarian sphere, and we need so many specialists. Already now it's not enough specialists on the ground. It's already not enough. For example, logoped, I don't know if I'm translating good, it's logopeds. A lot of children, they really need this logoped.
Like speech therapist.
Speech therapist. And for example, in Kharkiv, it's impossible to find a speech therapist because though high quality speech therapists, they moved, they fled the Kharkiv. Those who left, they are so overbooked, and we know that in children, and especially young children, in small children, it's the first stress reaction. It's they're losing that speech possibility to speak, and they would need this speech therapist. And so simple. We have a Kharkiv full of children, 20,000 children, there, and full of families, and it's a lack of specialists just because they are not exist in that amount that would need. So on what we are thinking is now to go to universities and to empower, go to school and to empower girls and young ladies to really enter to that universities and to get that specialists, because they would have a job. Unfortunately, and that we would need them in the future, and maybe it can be also the point of specific view, because it's already something that we will witness in the next 5-10 years, lack of specialists, and most of them can be like on a gender, that can be a woman. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just add to what
Yes,
Helena said. I'm sorry. On this point of shortage of workers, of human capital outflow from Ukraine, that's actually what I'm focusing now at Chatham House, I'm working on a research about Ukrainian refugees, Ukrainians abroad, and their contribution to Ukraine's recovery. And you know, a very important point here is that 65%, according to studies of the Center for Economic Strategy in Ukraine, 65% of refugees, Ukrainians abroad, are women. And this is, you know, a very important number, which shows us that Ukraine lost a big number of its women. Many of those women are very highly skilled and qualified and educated professionals who are not always working in jobs when they are abroad that match their skills. Therefore, they might lose some of their qualifications. They are facing incredible challenges of taking care of the children, being deprived of, you know, their networks of support, being in another country where they do not speak the language, like overcoming all these challenges. So when we are talking about, you know, how can the EU and NATO support Ukrainian women, they can also support them on the territory of the EU and NATO countries by, you know, changing, adjusting maybe the policies of giving them access to the labor market, of matching their skills with the jobs that they can find, and also potentially talking with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian businesses on how the skills that Ukrainian women might acquire while they are temporarily abroad can be then put to use in Ukraine's reconstruction. So I'm a firm believer that, yes, it is a challenge that Ukraine now lost many of its people who are temporarily abroad, but I believe that many of them can and will return once the situation there stabilizes, once it is safe. Many of Ukrainian refugees express this desire. They express the desire to work for Ukraine's rebuilding and reconstruction even while they are abroad. So I think that there is a potential for increasing cooperation between Ukrainian entities, both public and private entities, and entities in other countries to facilitate that, to help this contribution of Ukrainian women who are abroad, to help them not to lose their skills, to help them put these skills to use in their countries where they are temporarily staying, but also then to put these skills to use for Ukraine's rebuilding.
Thank you so much, both of you, Olga and Elena. I just would like to highlight once more that indeed, when it comes to what EU and NATO could do further or more, that we're indeed talking about women in Ukraine and Ukrainian women outside of Ukraine and primarily within EU NATO countries. And I think what you, Olga, highlighted about skilled, qualified Ukrainian women being within your Atlantic area, how they could be further enabled, to access the market and do the jobs according to their qualifications. But what I heard from Olena is equally important, and I think it's worthwhile reflecting, and I would invite you and NATO to reflect about that. NATO is already doing a lot of training and education of service to women in leadership roles, but it looks like Ukrainian women are already leading and learning on the job in terms of many leadership roles that they're just throwing themselves into. But what I heard is medical rehabilitation. I know that there are various trust funds within NATO where this could be a potential project, how to further bring doctors or psychologists for children and women and to address medical rehabilitation needs. Or rebuilding schools, for example, because a lot of children are indeed studying underground or in the metro stations, and I know a lot of member states of both NATO and EU are doing bilaterally these efforts, but maybe this is also for international organizations to explore. And then perhaps looking at possibilities to engage with NGOs and create civil platforms in order to hear the voices of Elena and also Olga, who can further enlighten on what the situation is and what could be the needs further. So just wanted to highlight these aspects because I think they are terrific potential solutions and would help Ukraine and women and children in the medium to short term and then post-war as well. Gemma, down to you now for the questions and answers. Thank you.
Yeah, because we would like to open the discussion to all of you and also to our participants online. And I think Jerome will help us with the mic. Can we take your mic, Maria? So please, who would like to start? And perhaps you just shortly present yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Nurayat Maja. And I would like to actually address a question to our two participants, Olena and Olga, on the ground. So we were hearing a lot of concepts of the EU and NATO and also your own experience on the ground. But what I'm interested on is beyond the theoretical concepts we have, and you were mentioning also the changing role of you during the conflict. How do you perceive actually the direct collaboration with your male comrades on the ground, or your husbands, brothers, fathers? How do you perceive this? And because I think what will last at the end is, after when the conflict ends, beyond all these concepts, the direct collaboration and collaboration, actually engagement of the main actors on the ground, which is the society. So your direct environment. So would you give us some input, or actually some input about what is this situation about, this social situation about, or this with these collaborators, or with, sorry, not collaborators, but with your direct environment?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Perhaps Olga, you want to start?
Can I just clarify, are we talking about work with men you mentioned, right? Like with the husbands and...
Yeah, perhaps also more general of the role of men in this context.
Yeah, well, war affects everyone, maybe disproportionately it affects women, but men are also affected in other ways, and sometimes war could lead to the backsliding of some, let's say, progress and modern achievements in the society, such as empowerment of women, their access to the labor market. There might be more patriarchal return to patriarchal values, or viewing these traditional roles of man who is a defender, who is a fighter, who is a soldier, and woman who is back home taking care of children and elderly. And it is the case that in many cases it does indeed happen. In many families it does indeed happen like this. Ukraine is a country that has been changing really rapidly in the last 30 years since it achieved its independence. There were many progressive laws and policies aimed at empowering women, at supporting their career ambitions and so on. Women themselves have done a lot for that. A lot of female organizations, NGOs who are fighting for their rights, and were very vocal about this. Even now, actually, there is a debate initiated by some female members of the Ukrainian armed forces about the compulsory mobilization of women. So they are saying, actually, if we want to have real gender equality, why should only men be mobilized, or certain categories of men be mobilized to the army? Women should also be mobilized, maybe smaller number, maybe not for the combat positions, but there are a lot of positions in the army where women can contribute. So at the moment, participation of women in the Ukrainian armed forces is voluntary. It is not compulsory, but it can be changed. There is a debate about that, and even women themselves are voicing this idea. They are saying that would reflect the principle of gender equality. Of course, not everyone is supportive of that. It's quite controversial, but I think the fact that there is a debate on that is a sign that Ukrainian society is quite modern, that a lot of progress has been made in terms of gender equality and empowerment of women. We are not completely back to square one in terms of this traditional gender roles and return to the traditional gender roles yet. Hopefully this will not happen. However, there are also demographic factors. For example, the fertility rate in Ukraine is now 1 child per woman, which is very low, which is lower than before the full-scale invasion, when it was already low at the rate of 1.2 children per woman. Now it's just 1. Therefore, of course, there is the government and the officials I've spoke with, also on my field trip to Kyiv last week, for my research, they voiced this concern about demographics. They thought, like, should we do something, like what kind of policies should we implement to address this issue, because it's just one part of the problem, obviously the low fertility rate because of war, but also then the outflow of women, the high rate of mortality among both women and men, but more of men than women. So the average life expectancy of men in Ukraine is around 57 years, which is, as you can imagine, very low. Before the full-scale invasion it was 64, which was much lower than in most developed countries of the EU and NATO. Now it is 57, and the fall in the men's life expectancy is much higher than the fall in the women's life expectancy. So, we should address, we should take into consideration all these factors when we are talking about some policies for Ukraine, economy, demographics, social life for the post-war period. But of course, the priority now is to win the war and make it end as soon as possible. I'm not sure that answers your question, though, but I do my best. Thank you.
Olena, would you like to add something? And perhaps I would just ask as well, are you also concerned perhaps about more violence in households? Because the experience of other wars shows that soldiers come back with traumas, and this can also lead to more violence against women.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking about this, on the first question, if I understood also correctly, how it's also influencing on the women on the ground, what we also see in our work, that situation that a lot of men are mobilized and was took into the army. So our workers, it's a huge also pressure for you that you have to continue to do your work, and you are now worries about your husband on the front line, and you are also taking care about your children, and you have to continue your life. So and also if somebody dies on the front line from the husbands of our workers, it's influencing on all of us. Like if we have 200 people in our organization, if a husband of one of our workers will die, so all of other women whose husbands serving in the army would reflect also very deeply, because it can happen with everybody. So I would say that what's also influencing on continue to work and to keep your routine, that situation that every day somebody can die, and it will be somebody of our husbands or brothers or cousins or sons. So we have to also take into the consideration that how after that to continue to work, and what have to do after, how to support our colleague. And also what we also seeing in the small villages or towns, that because of a lot of men being taken to the army, some of the positions, for example, just recently I visited in one of the city, some just like it's not a school, but it's like art school, after classes school for art and sort of things, and the staff was 50-50, like men and women were there, but all of the men were taken to the mobilized, and in the end the headmaster of this school said, okay, if you mobilize me, so somebody have to take my position. So they decided after not to take him to the army and to save him on this position. So I would say that a lot of women sometimes have to take a leadership position just because the men were just physically mobilized or taken to the army, and these positions have to be taken by somebody. So I say that a lot of women feel that they have to be now leaders in the small communities, because there is physically no those men were mobilized or unfortunately already died in the army. Also, sometimes, just recently, one of my neighbors, he's 21, he died in the front line. And he was also, he was raised in the family, they were 6 children and raised only by one mother. So he was the oldest son, and he was helping. He was like a father for the youngest sisters and brothers. And now he died on the front line. So now for this woman, it's not just she lost a son and she lost her main man in the family. So how now she have to continue to work and to keep her professional life. So it's influencing a lot, and I think that on the ground it's not so important whether it's man or woman. It's very important that specialists are on the ground, teachers are at school, and husbands at home, and what consider around. About your question about the home violence, I think that now we don't witnessing this, and also because we don't have a huge demobilization, and we don't have that situation now that a huge number of veterans now going back home. I think that we are still on that stage that we still just need more men in the army, and mobilization still continues, and there is no talks about demobilization. So I think that what my friend, her husband serving in the army from the very beginning of the war, so she said that she already see the changes, and she already understand that their life will not be again the same that it was before the war. That, for example, if he never drink, so now he started to drink, and she understands that everything will change after he will come back home, but still this is a situation that most of the men are not yet coming back home. So, but for sure we understand that it's impossible just to serve on the front line for years and come back and continue your life in the same situation. So that's why also we need specialists and experts and professionals who would know how to support families in the situation of when veterans come back home. And with the psychosocial rehabilitation and the rehabilitation in Ukraine, it's very difficult situation, and most of these services are leading by NGOs and government cooperation, but we don't have strong state system of rehabilitation and sort of things.
Thank you. You want to add something? Yes.
Yeah, perhaps just in terms of concepts, because we of course go much beyond concepts at the EU, starting with the 50 billion Ukraine facility. 77% of that goes to recovery, and recovery for us incorporates psychosocial support, etc. So it's not just infrastructure recovery, it's also looking at the economical recovery, psychosocial recovery. And when we integrate gender perspective, well, I feel like I'm getting a lot of feedback from this microphone, integrate a gender perspective into this, then we are looking, of course, also at, for example, issues like domestic violence and the risk of it increasing. And the Ukrainian national authorities are well aware of this, if anything. We were there a year ago, myself and the ambassador. We met with the Deputy Prime Minister, we met with the Deputy Minister of Interior, and she herself brought up the need to address and already make sure that there were measures in place, mechanisms and policies, but also resources to address the risks of both addressing psychosocial trauma, but also domestic violence. And similarly for the economic recovery, if we consider just enormous potential for women entrepreneurs, and the financing needs from the banks and the banking system to be able to provide credits for the women entrepreneurs is additional sector. And here, perhaps I would look this into something the EU set up some time ago. It's the Eastern Partnerships Working Group on Gender Equality. We bring together Eastern Partnership countries, gender equality ministers. And for example, from the Ukrainian government, Commissioner Levchenko came for the first meeting. And in this, we are bringing together the Eastern Partnership expertise so that they can share also their lessons learned, their best practices for stronger policy response on gender equality.
Thank you for this extra information. So, okay. But I think we should have more questions. Yeah. So are there other questions from the audience? Yeah, I know. Just waiting first here. Yeah, please.
Yeah, my name is Fabiola Malach, and thank you for highlighting that the Women, Peace and Security agenda is a priority for the NATO and the EU. And I was wondering or asked myself that it can be difficult to have all the member states on the same page, and wanted to ask you how you handle backlash maybe to the Women, Peace and Security agenda within the EU and NATO. Thank you.
So perhaps you start with NATO.
Thank you. I think this issue of backlash, it's something that you can see as a general trend around the globe at the moment. And it's a general trend that's also being fueled, I would say, online. It's not just, but the online also has a lot of effects offline. But it is something that is, worrying, because when I was saying earlier, gender equality is good defense, it's because it really is. Diversity is an asset beyond the numbers. It's not, to go back to what Olga was saying earlier on gender equal conscription, it's actually something that we're starting to see. For example, I think the Danish defense minister and the Danish prime minister just some weeks ago announced the gender equal conscription for Denmark. They already have gender equal conscription in Norway and Sweden, which has been going on for a couple of years. And just to quote the Danish defense minister, he basically said that a broader base for recruiting, including all genders, is needed. And this is also goes down to this question of the demographic evolution and the importance of building up defense. But it's so much more than simple math, because it really is an asset. It's to integrate the gender perspective into military and non-military instruments of power is something that enhances our capabilities. And for me, for example, when I see the large number of women joining the Ukrainian armed forces, I feel they're also delivering a powerful message of social cohesion and resilience, which I think is a very important message to deliver. But I think the issue of the backlash is something that you're seeing across countries, across regions, and so it is something that is worrying, and something that it's important to be aware of, and important to think about exactly how is it best to basically make a case again for gender equality. Because when I was listening to Jonna speaking earlier, gender equality is not just smart defense, it's also very much smart economics. And when we go into the recovery and reconstruction phases, it's something which is very important to have in mind. There's an economic reason for gender equality, including even gender-based violence. I think the World Bank has already measured that in some countries, not all, but in some countries, the cost of the the cost of gender-based violence on GDP can be up to 3.7%. And that's more than many countries actually put into their education systems. So it's important.
Yeah, that's an impressive figure. Do you want to add something from the EU?
Perhaps in terms of the gender backlash or the global erosion of women's rights, I relate this directly into geopolitical shifts and to the Russian toolbox. It is very much driven by the ideas that gender equality, intending to frame gender equality and human rights as Western values. So now as EU and EU member states in multilateral platforms, trying to maintain our global standards on women's rights and gender equality, there is an increasing number of states that disagree with this. And it goes into these disinformation campaigns and ultimately into geopolitical shifts where different states are aiming to frame this intentionally from angles that aim to either polarize EU internally or polarize the global geopolitics, so that EU and its partners would have less allies. What it ultimately then ends up meaning is that women across the world have less protections. And in terms of I'm going to bring one more element to the Ukrainian war. One could say the internal gender backlash in the Russian society could have been seen already as an indicator of their increasing aggression, because just a few years before, they started eroding their national policies, including criminalization of domestic violence, which they moved away from the criminal code, I remember, as a more so-called petty offense or something similar. So you could already see those indicators. And as we are moving now globally into erosion of women's rights, what does that mean for the global security context is, I think, rather worrying.
Veronica, do you have a question for us from our online audience? Is there anything? No, nothing in the chat, so please feel free to ask more questions here. If there are any, then I would like... no, there's some. Okay, please.
Hello, my name is Ricarda Götz-Preisner. I'm from the city of Vienna, so no national, no supranational. And as the city of Vienna took in about 50,000 Ukrainian refugees, we also changed a lot of our services. Of course, I work in the women's department, so our job is actually to have Ukrainian language in the shelters, to offer counseling, as many, even though if you flee with your family, without, if you were suffering from, we call it sexualized violence, because I heard today a lot of sexual violence, and I would very much disagree with this term. So it's sexualized violence, and as a city we see the impact a lot, that a lot of our services need to really address, first of all, Ukrainian language. Not everybody speaks German, except in this room maybe. What would the colleagues on the panel or also on the screens see the city's role as well, if we can even offer more support for maybe even these refugees that also want to return?
Would you be so kind to address it to one of the person, because we don't have the time for like 4 answers?
I can't see the name really.
So it's Olga or Lena?
Olena, I'm very interested with the children's voices, because
a
lot of our refugees come with children. Actually.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So Olena, would you be so kind to answer?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Indeed, it's very important, and we have our hotline, online psychological support, and every second request on our online psychological support is from women abroad, from those women who never planned to flee the country, but because of war had to move 1,000 kilometers from home, and now they don't know how to deal with the children, with the homesickness, with the teenagers that are now angry with the mothers because they've been taken so far from their home and the friends, and the mothers call us and say, okay, how I have to continue to deal with my teenagers if I wanted to save their lives, but they don't appreciate it, and now I'm afraid to come back to Kharkiv, for example, which every day under the shellings, and they don't want to come back to some rent apartment and to live really in a very in a tough situation. So it's indeed a question for so many women, and especially for those women which husbands serving in the army. So you are living for thousands of kilometers, but every day with your husband, or with monitoring the online. Some of women, they are telling us that I'm physically in somewhere, for example in Vienna, but mentally I'm every day in Ukraine, because I'm totally digging into all these chats and online and what's going on, what is happening, and it's very frustrating, and especially for children. So what to do? I think that European communities and cities really did a lot. I would say that it's something that in one point we do understand that, okay, what else we can do? We cannot bring your husband to, and we cannot bring you back home because it is still occupied, or I don't know, it is still under the shellings. So it's really gives us that situation that, okay, what else? But in the end, the best situation would be that the war is finished and they can come back home. What we also see, some of women, they already find the work, and some of children, and especially younger age, they are already adopt so well and speak language so well that maybe they will not come back, and they are not recognizing as a variantes to come back home. So I would say that it's really different, and also for us, because we cannot give advice, come back home, and we cannot give advice, please stay there if you are not really good there. I think that a lot of children are seeking for the community inside, and for example in Vienna, and women and children, they would need a Ukrainian community, and if they will have this possibility to really have this place for gather together. And what is really important, sometimes we can think that Russian community, and even if they are good Russians and Ukrainians, they can be together. It's sometimes really very wrong, because no matter how Russians can be with their views, like they can support Ukraine, but it's so important that they would have in their cities in Europe their own Ukrainian community, and they can still keep their because it's only Ukrainian to Ukrainian can understand what you are going through, and what I also hear a lot from Ukrainian women, that and it's something that peer to peer, only veteran can understand veteran, only Ukrainian can understand Ukrainian, and it's nothing discriminating to, I don't know, Russian people, those who don't support the war and things. But it's very important for that communities to have this people from Ukraine, and they would have a place to gather together and to support each other, and children can find friends among Ukrainians. And it's not that we are not saying that they don't have to integrate in the local community. They have to integrate, but it's always easier if you have somebody next to you who just understands you, who understands your moods. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have like the last, no? Is there another last question? Otherwise we would conclude. Okay. Then.
Thank you very much. It's I think today's discussion has really highlighted the pivotal role that women play in international security. And it's a privilege to hear firsthand from Olena all the hard work that you're doing to keep, to contribute to the war effort in Ukraine society in particular, and from you, Olga, doing additional research into these topics. And it was a privilege to have you and NATO representatives in terms of what their assessments, what they're showing so far, and what else could be done. I just would like to highlight perhaps a few takeaways. One is that, while Ukrainian men and women are fighting and on the front lines, It's really the women who are holding the Ukrainian society together. And often this kind of things goes unnoticed or as if it is invisible work. But no, the Ukrainian women should be protected and enabled and integrated into formal decision-making processes, and this should be recognized just as Zelensky is giving out medals and certificates. It should be done the same way for women, for their role in keeping Ukrainian society together. And this should be, portrayed as key lessons learned for other war situations. And I heard, in terms of particularly what Olga highlighted, the priority is, of course, to win this war. The priority is to provide as much support as possible on the military front, on financial front, and a lot is being done already, but much more could be done too. So I was very pleased to hear from NATO side, from the CAP perspective, in terms of training and education of Ukrainian women as they take up servicewomen roles, but also the uniforms, military uniforms, which are being funded by NATO to better fit women, but also from the EU on the social economic side, how much the EU is already doing to contribute and facilitate the war effort, whether it's Ukraine facility, whether it's gender action plan focused on gender mainstreaming. So my final message would be that indeed let's keep the priority on focusing to win this war, but at the same time let's not forget the critical role that women play and the gender perspective, and as Anna said, it's smart defense. So I would like to thank very much for the speakers, for the participants online and in person, for Gemma in co-moderating with me, and for the hosts in enabling this important event. And to the very many women who are here from Berlin today, I think more than 20 from them who are here on study tour and who reached out in order to organize an event like this. So thank you very much to all and everyone, and I wish you a great day. Thank you.